The dust kicked up around Grace Coleman's boots as she stumbled through Oroville's main street at midnight, clutching a torn flour sack against her chest while 3 men shouted behind her in the darkness. She had killed a man tonight, shot him clean through the heart when he tried to take what little money she had left in this world, and now his brothers wanted blood or gold, whichever came first. The gunshot still rang in her ears as she pushed through the door of the Silver Spur boarding house, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the lock behind her. It was July of 1874, and Oroville sat baking under the California sun like a stone in a blacksmith's forge. Grace had arrived in town 3 weeks earlier with nothing but a worn dress, $52 she had saved working as a seamstress in Sacramento, and the knowledge that her stepfather would kill her if he ever found her again. The money represented 2 years of secret savings, coins tucked away while he drank himself stupid every night, and she guarded it with her life because it was her life, the only thing standing between her and destitution. She climbed the narrow stairs to her room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The man she had shot, Frank Doyle, had cornered her outside the general store where she worked. He had seen her counting coins earlier that day, watched her tuck them into her bodice with hungry eyes. When he grabbed her in the alley and tried to rip her dress open, she had pulled the little derringer she kept hidden in her pocket. She had not meant to kill him. She had only meant to scare him away. But the gun went off, and he fell, and now everything was ruined. Grace locked her door and shoved a chair under the handle. Her room was small, just a bed, a washstand, and a trunk where she kept her few possessions. She pulled the money from the flour sack and counted it with trembling fingers. $52 plus the 8 she had earned this week. $60 total. It was not much, but it was everything. She looked around the room frantically, trying to think of where to hide it. The trunk was too obvious. The washstand had no hidden compartments. Her eyes fell on the bed, and she grabbed her pillow, feeling along the seam. The pillowcase was old, the stitching loose in places. She could hide the money inside the pillow itself. Working quickly, Grace unpicked a section of the seam and stuffed the bills and coins deep into the pillow's stuffing. She pushed them down until they were completely hidden, then stitched the seam back together with shaking hands. When she finished, she laid the pillow back on the bed and sat down, her heart still pounding. A knock at the door made her jump to her feet. "Grace Coleman?" a man's voice called. It was not angry or threatening, just calm and steady. "My name is Warren Jameson. The sheriff sent me to check on you." Grace grabbed the derringer from her pocket and held it pointed at the door. "I do not need checking on." "Frank Doyle's brothers are gathering a mob down at the saloon," Warren said. "They are planning to come here within the hour. The sheriff wants you moved to a safer location." "The sheriff did not seem too concerned about my safety when Frank Doyle was alive," Grace said bitterly. She had complained to Sheriff Morrison twice about Frank following her, and both times he had told her she was being dramatic. "The sheriff is a fool," Warren said bluntly. "But I am not. Will you open the door? Or do you want to wait until the Doyle brothers burn down this boarding house with you inside it?" Grace hesitated, then moved the chair and unlocked the door. She kept the gun pointed forward as she opened it. The man on the other side was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore dusty range clothes and a gun belt that looked well used but not showy. He glanced at her derringer and nodded approvingly. "Smart to keep that handy," he said. "Though, if you want my opinion, you should aim a bit lower. Center mass is easier to hit when your hands are shaking." "I am not shaking," Grace lied. Warren looked at her for a long moment, and she felt suddenly exposed under his gaze. She was 21 years old, with dark blonde hair that never stayed pinned properly and a face her stepfather had called plain. She was too thin, too tall, too everything wrong and nothing right, but Warren Jameson looked at her like she was worth looking at. "Gather your things," he said quietly. "I have a place you can stay until this blows over." "I do not know you," Grace said. "Why would I go anywhere with you?" Because in about 45 minutes, a dozen drunk men are going to kick down that door looking for you because Frank Doyle shot a man in Marysville last year and got away with it, which means his brothers think they can do whatever they want because I am offering you a choice, and in about 45 minutes, you will not have one." He paused. "And because I know what it is like to have nowhere else to turn." Something in his voice made Grace believe him. She nodded slowly and began gathering her few possessions. She folded her 2 spare dresses, her hairbrush, her sewing kit. She picked up the pillow from her bed, and Warren raised an eyebrow. "Sentimental value?" he asked. Grace felt her face flush. "It is a good pillow." Warren did not argue. He helped her pack everything into her trunk, then hoisted it onto his shoulder like it weighed nothing. They went down the back stairs and out into the alley where a horse stood waiting. Warren tied the trunk to the saddle, then helped Grace mount up. He swung up behind her, and she felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back. "Hold on," he said, and kicked the horse into a canter. They rode through the dark streets of Oroville, past the Chinese Quarter where lanterns still glowed in windows, past the stamp mill where the sound of crushing ore never stopped, even at night. They followed the Feather River north, and Grace watched the moonlight dance on the water. She had not been on a horse in years, not since before her mother died and her stepfather took over their little farm. The rhythm of the movement was familiar and strange at once. After about 30 minutes, Warren turned the horse up a narrow trail that climbed into the foothills. They rode in silence, and Grace found herself intensely aware of every place their bodies touched. She could feel Warren's heartbeat against her spine, steady and strong. She could smell leather and wood smoke and something else, something that might have been sage. "Where are you taking me?" she asked finally. "My place," Warren said. "I have a cabin about another mile up. It is not fancy, but it is safe. The Doyles do not know about it." "How do you know the Doyles?" Warren was silent for a moment. "I used to work their ranch a few years back, before I figured out what kind of men they were. Frank was the worst of them, but his brothers are not much better. When I left, they tried to make sure I could not find work anywhere in the county. Spread stories about me being a thief." "Were you?" "No," Warren said simply. "But that does not matter much when 3 men with money and influence say you are." Grace understood that better than she wanted to admit. Her stepfather had told everyone in Sacramento that she was a liar and a thief, that she stole from him after her mother died. No one had believed her when she tried to tell them the truth about his drinking, his rages, the bruises he left where no one could see them. The cabin appeared suddenly out of the darkness, a sturdy log structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Warren dismounted and helped Grace down, then led the horse to a small barn behind the cabin. Grace stood uncertainly in the yard, clutching her pillow to her chest. Warren returned and unlocked the cabin door. He lit a lamp, and warm light spilled out into the night. "Come on," he said. "You must be exhausted." The cabin was simple but well kept. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies. A doorway led to what looked like a small bedroom. Everything was clean and orderly, which surprised Grace. Most men who lived alone let their places fall into disarray. "You can have the bedroom," Warren said, carrying her trunk inside. "I will sleep out here." "I cannot take your bed," Grace protested. "You can, and you will," Warren said firmly. "I have a perfectly good bedroll, and you have had a hell of a night. No arguments." Grace was too tired to argue. She took her pillow and followed Warren into the bedroom. It was small, with just a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the dark hills. Warren set her trunk at the foot of the bed. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," he said, "and help yourself to anything in the cupboard if you're hungry. I will be right outside if you need anything." "Warren," Grace said, and he turned back to look at her. "Thank you for helping me." He nodded. "Get some rest, Grace. We will figure out what to do in the morning." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Grace sat down on the bed, still holding her pillow. Her mind was racing too fast for sleep. She had killed a man. She was hiding in a stranger's cabin. Everything she owned in the world was in this room, including $60 hidden inside a pillow. She lay down finally, placing the pillow carefully under her head. Through the door, she could hear Warren moving around, the sound of the fire being stoked, the creak of floorboards. The sounds were oddly comforting. For the first time in weeks, she felt almost safe. Grace woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Sunlight streamed through the window, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, her hand going automatically to the pillow beside her. She dressed quickly and came out into the main room. Warren stood at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He had shaved since last night, and in the morning light she could see that he was younger than she had thought, maybe 27 or 28. There was a thin scar along his jaw that made him look dangerous and kind at the same time. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Hope you're hungry. I made enough for two." They sat at the table and ate in comfortable silence. The bacon was crispy, the coffee strong. Grace had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating. When they finished, Warren pushed his plate away and looked at her seriously. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said. "The Doyles are not going to forget about this. Frank might have been a bastard, but he was their blood. They will want justice, or what they call justice." "I have been thinking," Grace said slowly. "Maybe I should just leave. Go to San Francisco or somewhere else far away, start over." "You could do that," Warren agreed, "but running is not as easy as it sounds. You would need money for travel, for setting up somewhere new, and even then, the Doyles have connections. They could find you." Grace felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "So what do you suggest?" "I suggest we go talk to Sheriff Morrison," Warren said. "Explain what happened. Frank attacked you. You defended yourself. That is not murder. That is self-defense. With the right testimony, you would not even face charges." "The sheriff will not believe me," Grace said bitterly. "I already told him Frank was bothering me, and he did nothing." "He will believe me," Warren said. His voice was hard. "I have information about the Doyles that Morrison would very much like to keep quiet, things I saw when I worked for them. He will listen, or I will make him listen." Grace looked at Warren across the table, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to help her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Warren was quiet for a long moment. "2 years ago," he said finally, "I was in a bad situation. I was accused of something I did not do, and I had no one to back me up. No one would hire me. No one would even talk to me. I nearly starved that winter because everyone believed the Doyles' lies instead of giving me a chance to tell the truth." He looked at her directly. "I know what it is like to be alone and scared and have nowhere to turn. If I can keep someone else from going through that, I am going to do it." Grace felt something shift in her chest. She had spent so long being afraid, being alone, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone on her side. "All right," she said, we will talk to the sheriff." They rode into Oroville late that morning. The town was busy with the usual Saturday activity, miners coming in from the hills, farmers bringing produce to sell, women shopping for the week's supplies. Grace kept her head down as they rode past the general store where she worked, past the Silver Spur boarding house. The sheriff's office was a small wooden building next to the courthouse. Warren tied up the horse and helped Grace down. She could feel eyes on them as they walked up the steps, feel the weight of speculation and gossip. Small towns were like that. Everyone knew everyone's business within hours. Sheriff Morrison was a heavy-set man with a red face and perpetually suspicious eyes. He looked up from his desk when they entered, and his expression darkened when he saw Grace. "Miss Coleman," he said coldly, "I have been looking for you." "She has been with me," Warren said, stepping forward, "under my protection." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Warren Jameson, I should have known you would stick your nose into this. You have got a habit of defending people who do not deserve it." "Grace acted in self-defense," Warren said, his voice steady. Frank Doyle attacked her. She had every right to protect herself. That is not what I heard, Morrison said. I heard she lured Frank into that alley and shot him in cold blood, probably trying to rob him. That is a lie, Grace said, her voice shaking with anger. He grabbed me. He tried to tear my dress. I only fired because I was afraid he would kill me. Morrison leaned back in his chair. You have any witnesses to back that up? The bruises on her arms are witness enough, Warren said, and I'm willing to testify about Frank Doyle's character, about the things I saw him do when I worked the Doyle ranch. Morrison's face went pale, then red. You threatening me, Jameson? I am stating facts, Warren said calmly. Facts that would be very interesting to a territorial judge. Facts about cattle rustling and brand changing and a few other things the Doyles would rather keep quiet. Facts you ignored because the Doyles pay you to look the other way. The room went very still. Grace held her breath. Morrison stared at Warren for a long moment, then sighed heavily. What do you want? I want you to rule Frank Doyle's death as justifiable homicide, Warren said. Self-defense. No charges filed against Miss Coleman. And I want you to make sure the Doyle brothers understand that if they try to take revenge, they will have to answer to the law. The Doyles will not like that, Morrison said. I do not much care what the Doyles like, Warren said. Neither should you, if you want to keep wearing that badge. Morrison glared at both of them, but finally he nodded. Fine. I will rule it self-defense, but you need to keep Miss Coleman out of town for a while until things cool down. The Doyles are not going to forget this badge or no badge. Agreed, Warren said. He took Grace's arm and steered her toward the door. Outside, Grace let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. That was terrifying, she said. Morrison is a coward, Warren said, but he is a smart enough coward to know when he is outmatched. He helped her back onto the horse. Come on, we need to get your things from the general store and settle your account there. Then we will go back to the cabin. Grace worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her. What happens after things cool down? Where will I go? Warren looked at her, and something flickered in his green eyes. I was thinking you might stay at the cabin for a while. It is not much, but it is safe, and I could use some company. I cannot just live there for free, Grace protested. I need to work to earn my keep. The cabin needs a lot of work, Warren said. The garden is overgrown. My mending is piled up. The place could use a proper cleaning. If you wanted to help with that, I would call it even. He paused. And there is a woman in town, Mrs. Patterson, who runs a dressmaking shop. She's always looking for skilled seamstresses. I could introduce you, and you could work for her a few days a week. That would give you income, but keep you out of sight of the Doyles most of the time. It was a practical solution, a good solution. But Grace could not help wondering if there was more to Warren's offer than simple kindness. They stopped at the general store where Grace's employer, Mr. Henderson, was surprisingly understanding about her needing to leave. He paid her the wages she was owed and wished her well. Then they stopped at the Silver Spur where Grace gathered the last of her belongings and paid her account. The landlady, Mrs. Murphy, hugged her and told her to be safe. As they rode back toward the cabin, Grace found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait, into the solid presence of Warren behind her. The July sun beat down on them, but up in the foothills, a breeze off the Feather River made the heat bearable. She could smell pine and wildflowers and dust. Tell me about the cabin, she said. How long have you lived there? About 2 years, Warren said. I built it myself after I left the Doyle ranch. It took me 6 months, working in between whatever jobs I could get. Cutting timber, working the stamp mills, breaking horses. I saved every penny until I could buy the land and the materials. There was pride in his voice. It is not much, but it is mine. No one can take it away from me. Grace understood that feeling, the need to have something that belonged only to you. It was why she had hidden her money so carefully, why she had been willing to kill to protect it. When they reached the cabin, Warren showed her around properly. Behind the cabin was a large garden plot that had indeed gone to weeds, but she could see the bones of what had been there before, rows of beans and corn and squash. There was a chicken coop with half a dozen hens scratching in the dirt. A root cellar dug into the hillside. The barn was small but sturdy, with a room for 2 horses and feed storage. I am gone a lot during the day, Warren explained. I work as a wrangler for the Patterson Ranch, breaking horses and training them. The pay is decent and it gives me enough to live on, but it means the cabin gets neglected sometimes. It is a good place, Grace said sincerely. You should be proud of it. That evening, they ate a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. Grace found herself watching Warren as he moved around the cabin, the easy confidence of his movements, the way his hands looked strong and capable on everything he touched. He caught her looking once and smiled, and she felt her face flush. After dinner, Warren brought out a deck of cards and taught her to play poker. They bet with dried beans instead of money, and Grace discovered she had a knack for reading his tells. When she won 3 hands in a row, Warren laughed, a genuine sound that made something warm bloom in Grace's chest. You are a natural gambler, he said. I will have to watch myself around you. I have had to learn to read people, Grace said. The warmth in her chest faded a little. To know when someone was angry or dangerous, it kept me safe. Warren's smile disappeared. Your stepfather, he said quietly. It was not a question. Grace nodded. She had not told him about her stepfather, but she supposed it was obvious. After my mother died, he started drinking. At first, it was just yelling. Then it was other things. I learned to make myself small to stay out of his way. I saved every penny I could until I had enough to run. She looked down at her hands. But it is never enough, is it? Running. There's always someone else who wants to hurt you or take from you. Not everyone, Warren said softly. He reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm. Some people just want to help. Grace looked up at him, at his creek, water eyes, and the scar on his jaw, and the kindness in his face. Why? She whispered. Why do you want to help me? Warren was quiet for a long moment. At first, he said, it was because it was the right thing to do, because I have been where you are and I know how it feels. But now? He squeezed her hand gently. Now it is because when I look at you, I see someone brave and strong and worth knowing, someone I want to keep safe, not out of obligation, but because the thought of anything happening to you makes my chest ache. Grace's breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Warren was looking at her now, like she was precious and important and real. I do not know how to do this, she said honestly. I do not know how to trust someone, how to let someone in. Neither do I, Warren admitted, but maybe we could figure it out together. He stood and came around the table, and Grace stood too. He cupped her face gently in his hands, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not want to. She wanted to lean into his touch, to feel the warmth of him, the solidness. When he kissed her, soft and careful, it felt like coming home. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Warren left early each morning for the Patterson Ranch, and Grace spent her days working on the cabin and garden. She pulled weeds and replanted vegetables. She scrubbed floors and washed windows. She mended Warren's clothes, sewing careful stitches into torn shirts and worn trousers. 3 days a week, Warren drove her into town in a wagon, and she worked in Mrs. Patterson's dressmaking shop. Mrs. Patterson was a kind woman in her 50s who asked no questions about Grace's past. She paid fair wages and taught Grace new techniques for difficult seams and fancy embroidery. The work was satisfying, and Grace liked the feeling of creating something beautiful. The rest of the time, she and Warren were together. They cooked meals and played cards. They sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the sun set over the hills. Warren told her about his childhood in Missouri, about coming west after his parents died of cholera, about the years of hard work and harder lessons. Grace told him about her mother, who had been gentle and kind, and about the stepfather who had destroyed everything good in her life. At night, they kissed on the porch until Grace's knees felt weak, but Warren never pushed for more. He seemed content to take things slow, to let their relationship grow at its own pace. Grace was grateful for that. She was not ready for more, not yet. The memory of Frank Doyle's hands grabbing at her was still too fresh. 3 weeks after Grace moved into the cabin, Warren came home early from the Patterson ranch, his expression troubled. Grace was in the garden tying up tomato plants, and she straightened when she saw his face. "What is wrong?" she asked. Warren dismounted and came over to her. "I heard in town that the Doyles are still making noise about you. Tom Doyle, Frank's oldest brother, has been drinking at the saloon and telling anyone who will listen that you are a murderer who needs to hang." Grace felt her stomach drop. "Do you think he will come here?" "I do not know," Warren said honestly. Morrison warned him off, but Tom Doyle is not known for his sense. He might try something stupid. He took her hands. "I want you to have this." He pulled a small pistol from his belt, nicer than her Derringer, a Smith & Wesson revolver with a polished wooden grip. "I bought it from a man in town. It is loaded and ready. I want you to keep it with you at all times." "Warren, I do not want to shoot anyone else," Grace said, her voice shaking. "I know," Warren said gently, "but I want you to be able to protect yourself if I'm not here. Just having it might be enough. Most men will back down if they see a woman with a gun and the nerve to use it." Grace took the pistol reluctantly. It was heavier than her Derringer, more serious. She tucked it into the pocket of her apron. That night, Grace lay in bed listening to every sound outside the cabin, jumping at the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind in the trees. She got up finally and went out into the main room, where Warren was lying on his bedroll by the fireplace. "I cannot sleep," she said quietly. Warren sat up. "Come here." She went to him, and he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and held her. She could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and calming. "I am tired of being afraid," she whispered. "I have been afraid my whole life, afraid of my stepfather, afraid of Frank Doyle, afraid of his brothers. When does it end?" "When you decide it does," Warren said. "Fear is natural, Grace. It keeps us alive. But you cannot let it control you. You are stronger than you think." "I do not feel strong." "You killed a man who tried to hurt you. You ran away from a stepfather who beat you. You are working 2 jobs and rebuilding your life from nothing." Warren tilted her face up to look at him. "That is the definition of strong." Grace kissed him then, not soft and careful like their other kisses, but fierce and desperate. Warren responded in kind, his hands tangling in her hair, his mouth hot against hers. They sank down onto the bedroll together, and Grace felt her fear transform into something else, something hungry and alive. "Grace," Warren said, pulling back slightly. His breathing was ragged. "We should stop." "I do not want to stop," Grace said. "I am tired of being afraid. I want to feel something else. I want to feel you." Warren searched her face, and whatever he saw there made him nod. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." He kissed her again, slower this time, and Grace let herself fall into the sensation. His hands were gentle as they unlaced her nightgown, reverent as they explored her skin. When he made love to her, it was nothing like the violence she had feared. It was tender and careful and achingly good. Grace cried afterward, not from pain, but from relief, from the realization that this was what it was supposed to be like, this connection, this trust. Warren held her until she stopped shaking, whispering words of comfort against her hair. "You are safe," he murmured. "I have got you. You are safe." In the morning, Grace woke wrapped in Warren's arms, the blanket tangled around their bodies. Sunlight streamed through the window, and she could hear the chickens clucking outside. She felt different, transformed. The fear that had lived inside her for so long had not disappeared, but it had diminished, pushed back by something stronger. Warren stirred and opened his eyes. When he saw her watching him, he smiled. "Morning?" "Good morning," Grace said. She felt suddenly shy, uncertain. "Are you all right?" Warren asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I am more than all right," Grace said honestly. "I am happy." Over the following weeks, Grace and Warren fell deeper into their relationship. They made love often, sometimes with urgent passion, sometimes with slow, tender exploration. Grace discovered that her body was capable of pleasure she had never imagined, and Warren seemed to take joy in giving her that pleasure. But it was not just physical. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Warren taught her to shoot the revolver properly, taking her out into the hills for target practice. Grace taught him to make a decent loaf of bread. They worked together in the garden, planting late summer crops. They went riding along the Feather River, letting the horses drink while they kissed in the dappled shade of oak trees. One evening in early September, Grace was sitting on the porch darning socks when she heard a horse approaching. She tensed, her hand going automatically to the revolver in her apron pocket. But it was just Warren, home early from work. He dismounted and came up onto the porch, and Grace could tell immediately that something was wrong. His face was tight with worry. "What happened?" she asked. Warren sat down beside her. "I ran into Tom Doyle in town. He was drunk, and he started talking. Saying things about you. I told him to shut his mouth, and he took a swing at me." Grace's heart began to pound. "Did you fight?" "I defended myself," Warren said. "I put him down, but I did not hurt him badly, just enough to make him think twice." He looked at Grace seriously, but he made threats, said he was going to come up here and finish what Frank started, said no one makes a fool of the Doyles. "Maybe we should go to Sheriff Morrison," Grace said. "Morrison will not do anything unless Tom actually tries something," Warren said. "And by then it might be too late." He took her hand. "I do not want you here alone anymore. From now on, either you come with me to the Patterson Ranch or I stay home. No more leaving you by yourself." "Warren, you cannot give up your job because of me," Grace protested. "I am not giving it up," Warren said. "Old man Patterson owes me some time off. I have been working for him for 2 years without a break. He will understand." He squeezed her hand. "You are more important than any job, Grace. I need to know you are safe." That night, Grace lay awake long after Warren fell asleep. She hated that he was sacrificing for her, that her presence in his life was causing him trouble. She thought about her money, still hidden in the pillow, $60 that felt both like everything and nothing. She thought about running again, disappearing before the Doyles could hurt Warren. But she did not want to run anymore. She wanted to stay. She wanted to build a life here with Warren, to plant gardens and raise chickens and wake up in his arms every morning. She wanted to stop being afraid. The next morning, Grace made a decision. While Warren was out feeding the horses, she took the money out of her pillow and counted it. She had earned another $20 working for Mrs. Patterson, which brought her total to $80. It was enough to do something meaningful. When Warren came back inside, Grace was sitting at the table with the money spread out in front of her. "Grace?" Warren said, surprised. "Where did that come from?" "I have been hiding it," Grace admitted, "in my pillow. It is everything I have saved. I brought it with me from Sacramento, and I have been so afraid of losing it that I have kept it hidden." Warren sat down across from her. "You do not have to explain yourself to me. That money is yours." "I want to invest it," Grace said. "In us, in this cabin. I want to buy supplies to expand the garden, to fix up the barn, to make this place truly ours, and I want you to build me something." "What?" Grace met his eyes. "A lockbox. A real one, with a good lock that no one could break. I am tired of hiding money in pillows and being afraid someone will find it. I want a safe place to keep our savings, mine and yours, together. I want to stop living in fear." Warren looked at her for a long moment, and Grace saw something shift in his expression, something tender and fierce. "You want to combine our money? Make this a true partnership?" "I want to make this a home," Grace said. "Not just a place I'm staying until something better comes along. A real home, with both of us working together to build something good." Warren came around the table and pulled her into his arms. I will build you the best lockbox anyone has ever seen or heard," he said against her hair. "Strong enough to survive a fire or a flood. No one will ever be able to break into it." "When?" Grace asked. "Starting today," Warren said. "I will ride into town and buy the materials. Metal plates, a good lock, tools. It will take me a few days to build, but when I am done, you will have the safest lockbox in California." He was true to his word. That afternoon, Warren rode into Oroville and came back with a wagon full of supplies. He had bought thick steel plates, a heavy brass lock with an intricate mechanism, rivets, and metalworking tools. Over the next 3 days, Grace watched him work in the barn, heating and shaping the metal, fitting the pieces together with painstaking care. Warren had learned metalworking from a blacksmith in Missouri, and his skill showed in every detail of the lockbox. It was not fancy or decorative, but it was beautifully functional. The box itself was about 12 inches square and 8 inches deep, made from steel plates riveted together so tightly there were no gaps. The lid fit precisely, with a brass lock mounted in the front that required a key to open. Warren made 2 keys identical and gave one to Grace. "The lock mechanism is complex," he explained. "Even if someone tried to pick it, they would need hours and specialized tools. And the steel is thick enough that they could not just pry it open or smash it. If someone wanted to get into this box, they would have to cut through the metal itself, which would take a blacksmith's forge and a lot of time." Grace ran her hands over the smooth metal, feeling the weight and solidity of it. "It is perfect," she said. They placed the lockbox in the corner of the bedroom, bolted to the floor so no one could carry it away. Grace put her $80 inside, along with some important papers and the deed to Warren's land. Warren added his own savings, $43 he had been keeping in a tin under a floorboard. They locked it together, and Grace put her key on a chain around her neck. "There," Warren said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "No more hiding money in pillows, no more being afraid." Grace leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. "Thank you," she said, "for understanding, for building this for me." "I would build you anything," Warren said. "A house, a barn, a whole town if you asked for it. Whatever you need to feel safe, I will make it happen." That night, they made love with a new intensity, a new sense of commitment. Afterward, Grace lay with her head on Warren's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "I love you," she said quietly. She had not meant to say it, had not planned it, but the words came out anyway. Warren went very still. Then he tilted her face up to look at him. "Say that again." "I love you," Grace repeated more firmly this time. "I know it has only been a few months, but I do. I love you, Warren Jameson." "I love you too," Warren said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the night I saw you standing in that doorway with a gun in your hand, scared and brave at the same time. I have loved you every day since." They kissed, and Grace felt something settle in her chest, something warm and permanent. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not just safety or security, but love. Real love. The kind that made you want to build a future with someone. September turned into October, and the leaves in the foothills began to change color. Grace worked steadily for Mrs. Patterson, earning money that she and Warren put into the lockbox each week. Their savings grew slowly but surely. Warren talked about buying more land, expanding the garden, maybe getting some cattle in the spring. Grace talked about opening her own dressmaking shop someday, working for herself instead of someone else. They had not seen or heard from the Doyles since Warren's confrontation with Tom. Sheriff Morrison reported that Tom had left town for a while, gone to Sacramento on business. Grace allowed herself to hope that maybe the danger had passed, that the Doyles had finally decided she was not worth the trouble. Then, on a cold October evening, Tom Doyle came to the cabin. Grace was alone. Warren had ridden into town to pick up supplies, and he was not expected back until after dark. Grace was making dinner, beans and salt pork simmering on the stove, when she heard a horse outside. She grabbed the revolver from the table and moved to the window. Tom Doyle sat on his horse in the yard, swaying slightly. Even from inside, Grace could tell he was drunk. He had a rifle across his saddle. "Grace Coleman!" he shouted. I know you are in there. Come out and face me, you murdering bitch. Grace's hands shook as she cocked the revolver. She thought about hiding, but there was nowhere to go. The cabin only had 2 rooms, and if Tom decided to come inside, she would be trapped. I did not murder your brother, Grace shouted back. He attacked me. I defended myself. You are a liar, Tom yelled. Frank would never hurt a woman. You shot him in cold blood, and you are going to pay for it. He raised the rifle, and Grace dropped to the floor as a shot rang out. The bullet punched through the wooden wall above her head, and she heard the crack of splintering wood. Grace crawled toward the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She had to get outside, had to face Tom before he burned down the cabin or shot through the walls until he hit her. She took a deep breath, said a prayer to a God she was not sure she believed in, and threw open the door. Tom was reloading the rifle when Grace stepped out onto the porch. She raised the revolver with both hands the way Warren had taught her and aimed at Tom's chest. Put down the rifle, she said, and she was amazed at how steady her voice sounded. Put it down, or I will shoot you. Tom looked at her and laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You think I am afraid of you? You are nothing. Just a scared little girl playing with a gun. I have killed one Doyle, Grace said. I can kill another. Tom's face darkened with rage. He swung the rifle toward her, and Grace pulled the trigger. The revolver bucked in her hands, and Tom jerked backward, the rifle flying from his grip. He slumped in the saddle, clutching his shoulder, blood spreading between his fingers. You shot me, he gasped, his face white with shock. I told you to put down the rifle, Grace said. Her hands were shaking now, but she kept the revolver pointed at him. Now get off this property before I decide to aim better next time. Tom stared at her for a long moment, then turned his horse and kicked it into a gallop. Grace watched him disappear down the trail, then sank down on the porch steps, the revolver falling from her nerveless fingers. She started to shake uncontrollably, great shuddering tremors that made her teeth chatter. That was how Warren found her when he came home 10 minutes later. He dropped the supply sacks and ran to her, pulling her into his arms. What happened? He demanded. Grace, talk to me. Are you hurt? Grace told him everything, the words tumbling out between sobs. Warren held her tightly, his face going hard as stone as he listened. That is it, he said when she finished. This ends now. Tonight. We are riding into town, and we are settling this with the Doyles once and for all. Warren, no, Grace said. If you go after them, they will kill you. I am not going after them, Warren said. I am going to the sheriff and the territorial judge. I am going to file formal charges against Tom Doyle for attempted murder, and I am going to tell everyone in town exactly what kind of men the Doyles are, every crime they have committed, every person they have hurt. I have kept quiet for 2 years because I thought it was easier to avoid trouble than to confront it. But I was wrong. Some fights you cannot avoid. You have to face them head on. He cupped Grace's face in his hands. You are the bravest person I have ever met. You shot Tom Doyle to protect yourself, to protect our home. Now it is my turn to protect you. No more hiding, no more running. We are going to end this. They rode into Oroville that night, and Warren made good on his promise. They went to Sheriff Morrison first, and Warren laid out everything. The cattle rustling he had witnessed when he worked for the Doyles, the brands they had changed, the men they had threatened, the bribes they had paid to Morrison himself to look the other way. Grace added her testimony about Frank's attack and Tom's assault on the cabin. Morrison tried to bluster and deny, but Warren had documentation. He had kept records, written accounts of everything he had seen, dated and detailed. He had been preparing for this confrontation for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. You can choose to help us, Warren told Morrison, or you can go down with the Doyles. Either way, this information is going to the territorial judge in the morning. Your badge is not going to protect you if you are caught covering up felonies. Morrison looked at the papers spread across his desk and went pale. Finally, he nodded. "What do you want me to do?" "Your job," Warren said. "Arrest Tom Doyle for attempted murder. Arrest his brothers as accessories after the fact in Frank's crimes. Do what you should have done months ago." Morrison sent his deputies out that night. By morning, Tom Doyle was in custody, his shoulder bandaged and his face sullen. His brothers, John and Robert, were arrested trying to flee town. The territorial judge arrived 2 days later, and the trial was swift. Warren's testimony, combined with Grace's account and the evidence of Tom's attack, was damning. Tom Doyle was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attempted murder. John and Robert received shorter sentences for their roles in the family's criminal activities. Sheriff Morrison resigned in disgrace, and a new sheriff was appointed, a young man from Sacramento with a reputation for honesty. Through it all, Grace stood beside Warren, her hand in his. She testified clearly and calmly about Frank's attack and Tom's assault on the cabin. She watched the Doyles led away in chains and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was over. Finally, truly over. In November, as the first frost touched the hills around Oroville, Warren asked Grace to marry him. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, wrapped in a quilt against the cold. Warren had been quiet all evening, and Grace thought he was just tired from a long day at the Patterson ranch. Then he took her hand and turned to face her. "Grace Coleman," he said, "I've been thinking about how to say this for weeks, and I still do not have the right words, so I'm just going to be honest. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You are brave and strong and kind, and when I think about my future, all I see is you. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes," she said, "yes, I will marry you." Warren pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "It is not much," he said, "but it was my mother's, the only thing I have left of her. I want you to have it." Grace let him slip the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. She kissed him as the sun sank below the hills, as the first stars appeared overhead. "It is everything," she whispered. "You are everything." They were married in December in a small ceremony at the Oroville church. Mrs. Patterson stood up with Grace, and Old Man Patterson stood up with Warren. The new sheriff attended, along with a handful of friends they had made in town. Grace wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Warren wore a new suit, dark wool that made his green eyes even more striking. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Warren kissed Grace like she was the most precious thing in the world, and to him she was. They moved Grace's things from the bedroom to the main room, officially combining their lives. The lockbox stayed bolted in the corner, and they added to it regularly, saving money for the future they were building together. Warren bought 10 acres of adjoining land, expanding their property. Grace opened a small dressmaking business working from home, taking orders from women in town who wanted custom garments. In the spring of 1875, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Warren one morning over breakfast, and he was so overcome with joy that he picked her up and spun her around the kitchen until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Grace, we are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Grace suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and there were days when she could barely keep food down. But Warren was patient and attentive, bringing her water and crackers, rubbing her back, holding her hair when she was sick. As her belly grew, he built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. He carved their initials into the headboard along with the date. In late October, on a cool evening when the leaves were falling from the trees, Grace went into labor. Mrs. Patterson came to help, and she stayed with Grace through the long night of contractions and pain. Warren paced outside, too nervous to sit still until Mrs. Patterson finally called him in. Grace was propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. When Warren came close, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a baby boy with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were already trying to focus. "Your son," Grace said, her voice hoarse but filled with joy. "William. I want to name him William, after your father." Warren sat on the edge of the bed and took the baby in his arms with infinite care. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at his son, at this new life he and Grace had created together. "Hello, William," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." The years that followed were full and rich. William grew into a sturdy toddler, quick to laugh and curious about everything. In 1877, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. 2 years later came another son, Thomas. Their cabin expanded with their family, Warren adding rooms and a second story, always building, always improving. The dressmaking business flourished. Grace hired 2 young women from town to help with the sewing, and they worked together in a sunny room Warren had built specifically for that purpose. The money they earned went into the Lockbox, along with Warren's wages from the Patterson Ranch and later from his own horse breeding operation. The Lockbox Warren had built remained a symbol of their partnership, their commitment to building something lasting together. Inside it, they kept not just money, but important documents, letters, family mementos. Grace would sometimes take out the key she wore around her neck and open the box just to look inside, to remind herself of how far they had come. They never forgot the darkness that had brought them together, the fear and violence that had marked Grace's arrival in Oroville. But they did not let it define them. Instead, they chose to build a life of light and love, to create something good out of the pain they had both experienced. Grace still had nightmares sometimes, dreams where Frank Doyle was chasing her through dark streets, where Tom Doyle was shooting through the cabin walls. But Warren was always there to hold her when she woke, to remind her that she was safe, that the Doyles were in prison and could never hurt her again. In 1881, when William was 6 and Emma was 4 and Thomas was 2, Warren came home one day with news. The Patterson Ranch was for sale. Old man Patterson was retiring and moving to San Francisco to live with his daughter, and he wanted to sell the property to someone he trusted. "It is a lot of money," Warren said, spreading the papers out on the kitchen table. "More than we have saved. But the bank would give us a loan, and the ranch would be ours. All of it. The land, the horses, the house. We could build something real, Grace. Something to pass on to our children." Grace looked at the papers, at the vast acreage marked in careful lines, at the house that was 10 times larger than their cabin. It was terrifying and exciting at the same time. "Can we afford it?" she asked. "If we are careful," Warren said. "If we keep working hard and manage the money right, it would be tight for a few years, but I think we could do it." Grace thought about the money in the lockbox, about all the hours they had worked and saved. She thought about the cabin Warren had built with his own hands, about the life they had created from nothing. "Let us do it," she said. "Let us buy the ranch." They went to the bank the next day and secured a loan. It took every penny they had saved plus 20 years of payments, but the ranch became theirs. They moved in that spring, their family of 5 filling the big house with noise and laughter. Warren threw himself into the work of running the ranch, breeding and training horses, building his reputation as the best wrangler in 3 counties. Grace continued her dressmaking, now with a larger workshop and more employees. The Lockbox moved with them to the ranch house, installed in their bedroom just as it had been in the cabin. They continued to use it to store their savings and important papers, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren surprised Grace with a gift. He led her out to the barn, where he had been working in secret for weeks. Inside was a new lockbox, larger than the first, made from the same steel but with brass fittings and decorative engravings. "I wanted to make you something special," Warren said, "to mark 10 years together. This one is for the things that matter most. Not money, but memories, letters, photographs, things we want to save for our children." Grace ran her fingers over the engravings, intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. In the center of the lid, Warren had engraved their names and wedding date, along with the names and birth dates of their 3 children. "It is beautiful," Grace said, tears in her eyes. "You are beautiful. I love you so much, Warren Jameson." "I love you too," Warren said, pulling her into his arms. "Every day, I love you more." The years continued to pass, marked by small joys and occasional challenges. William grew into a young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's careful attention to detail. Emma was bright and curious, always asking questions about everything. Thomas was the wild one, always climbing trees and chasing after his siblings. In 1890, when Grace was 37 years old, she gave birth to one more child, a surprise baby girl they named Rose. The doctor warned that the pregnancy might be dangerous at her age, but Grace was determined. Rose arrived healthy and squalling, with blonde hair like her mother and green eyes like her father. Warren held his newborn daughter and looked at Grace with so much love it made her chest ache. "4 children," he said. "A ranch, a successful business. How did we get so lucky?" "It was not luck," Grace said. "It was work. It was choosing each other every day, even when things were hard. It was building something together." The ranch thrived under Warren's management. He was known throughout California as a master horse trainer, and buyers came from as far as Nevada and Arizona to purchase his stock. Grace's dressmaking business had grown into a successful shop in town, employing 8 women and producing custom garments for wealthy clients throughout the state. The original lockbox, the one Warren had built in the barn all those years ago, remained in their bedroom. It held their most important documents now, along with sentimental items: the deed to the ranch, Grace's mother's wedding ring, the first dollar Warren had earned from selling a horse, a lock of hair from each of their children, letters they had written to each other over the years. Sometimes, late at night, Grace would take out her key and open the lockbox, looking through the contents and remembering. She would remember the terrified girl who had arrived in Oroville with nothing but money hidden in a pillow. She would remember the cowboy who had offered her safety without asking for anything in return. She would remember the night he built her the lockbox, the way his hands had worked the metal, the care he had taken to make it perfect and unbreakable. The lockbox had been more than just a safe place to keep money. It had been a promise, a symbol of trust and partnership, and building something lasting together. It had been Warren's way of saying he wanted to share his life with her, to combine their resources and their dreams into something bigger than either of them alone. In 1900, Warren and Grace celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the county. William was 25 now, married with 2 children of his own. Emma was 23, teaching at the school in Oroville. Thomas was 21, working as Warren's right hand on the ranch. Rose was 10, bright and funny and full of life. As Grace looked around at the people gathered to celebrate their marriage, at the home they had built, at the family they had raised, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the night she had run through Oroville's dark streets, fleeing the Doyle brothers, certain her life was over. She thought about Warren appearing out of nowhere, like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to say. Warren found her standing on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and purple. He slipped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "What are you thinking about, Reeser?" he asked. "It's everything," Grace said. "How scared I was when I came here. How certain I was that I would never be safe, never be happy, and look at us now." "I knew," Warren said softly. "From the first moment I saw you standing in that doorway with a gun in your hand, I knew you were going to be important. I knew my life was about to change." "You saved me," Grace said. "No," Warren said, turning her to face him. "We saved each other. You gave me something to build for, something to work toward. You gave me a reason to put down roots and create something lasting. Before you, I was just drifting from job to job, place to place. You gave me a home." Grace kissed him as the sun sank below the horizon, as their children laughed inside the house, as the horses whinnied in the pasture. 25 years, and she still felt butterflies when he looked at her. 25 years, and she still could not imagine her life without him. The lockbox sat in their bedroom, bolted to the floor, keeping their treasures safe. No one had ever tried to break into it, not in all the years they had owned it. The steel was still solid, the lock still secure. It had done its job perfectly, protecting what mattered most. But Grace knew the real protection had never been the steel or the lock. It had been the man who built it, the promise he had made to keep her safe, to build something with her that no one could break. It had been their love, forged in the fire of hardship and tempered by years of partnership and trust. As the years continued to pass, Warren and Grace grew old together on the ranch. Their hair turned gray, and their hands became gnarled with arthritis, but they still worked side by side every day. Warren trained horses until he was 70, only stopping when his knees finally gave out. Grace sewed until her eyes grew too weak to thread a needle. They watched their children grow and have children of their own. William took over management of the ranch, raising cattle and horses just as his father had. Emma became principal of the Oroville School. Thomas started his own ranch in the next county. Rose married a doctor and moved to Sacramento, but she visited often with her 3 children. In 1921, Warren fell ill with pneumonia. He was 73 years old, and his body was worn out from a lifetime of hard work. Grace sat by his bed day and night, holding his hand, refusing to leave his side. "I am not ready to let you go," she whispered fiercely. "We have more years left. We have grandchildren to watch grow up. We have work to do." Warren smiled weakly. "Grace, my love, we have had 46 years together. 46 years of building and loving,